Hi everyone, welcome to tonight's Writers Workshop, Intro to Illustration for Writers. I'm happy to welcome back our instructor tonight, designer and educator Liza Wynette. You may recognize Liza from our tech workshops here at the library. She also teaches graphic design at Parkland College, and she's here tonight to share her expertise with us. Thank you for being here, Liza, and I will turn it over to you now.
All right, thank you very much. Hey everyone. Well, thanks for coming out this evening on kind of this rainy, muggy night. So this was an absolute pleasure to put together. I love illustration, and although I teach a lot of graphic design and do work as a freelance graphic designer, illustration is really my passion. So I'm excited to be here and to talk a little bit about it, and also how it might complement a writer's story, and just kind of give you a general overview of book illustration. How many of you are have a manuscript that you're considering using illustrations or placing illustrations with? Are you maybe? Are you? How about how many of you are interested in like self-publishing? Great. And how, okay, self-publishing. Anyone who's interested in working with a publishing agency? So yeah, maybe. Okay, that'll kind of give me an idea of you know, kind of where to focus this presentation on. Okay. So a few topics we're going to cover tonight is we're going to talk about who illustrators are, and what their profession looks like and how they assist writers in creating illustrations for their work. We're also going to talk about a little bit about the types of illustration that are contained with books, and then move on to kind of the business of working with an illustrator, how to hire one, how to work with one, and the workflow that that happens when you pair a manuscript with artwork, and then some resources on creating your own illustrations. Is anyone interested in doing that? Yeah? Oh, great. Excellent. So I have some great resources that will probably be shared afterwards that will help you out with that. All right. So there's a lot of different types of book illustrations, and I think most people, when they think about book illustration, they think about children's books. But I brought in some other examples that I thought were quite charming from my own bookshelf. Sometimes it's really, like, it's hard to imagine a book without the illustrations. This one I had since I was really tiny, and this is from Mr. Silverstein, and you know, it's hard to imagine his poetry and poems without these goofy, sort of dated now illustrations, but they're so charming. And my sister and I would look at these for hours and enjoyed them quite a bit when we were young. Right. So the most classic and most important illustration, if you want to have one incorporated in your manuscript, of course, is the cover. And that is how your the viewer is going to first interact with the book, is usually by the cover. And when we think of illustration, often think of something that's sort of narrative, but I kind of wanted to show you that it can also be something else. So you can also have things like illustrated type. And I picked this one off the shelf because this winter I came in, I was looking for something new to read, and this was in the new book section right as you walk in, and I just grabbed it by the cover. I had no idea about the author, and so now I'm on his fourth book, and just because I was really enthralled with the cover, I picked up his series. So. And the cover also can be really subtle and plain. So here's one with mostly just typography in orange. But if you look really, really closely, there is some artwork kind of faded into the background. So it doesn't have to be overly complex. All right. Actually, while I have this one up, the next type of illustration you often see are called spot illustrations. And those are any illustrations that are found within the margins of the page. So this is Plain Verse. This was my husband's favorite book when he was growing up. This is a pretty new copy of it. But just simple, tiny little things like this can really complement your work and add another dimension. I really love this book, and I picked this up when I first moved to Champaign 12 years ago. And it has these tiny little spot illustrations that just add some interest to the page. The next type of illustration is what we refer to as a full page with bleed. And that's an illustration on the inside that the illustration goes to the cut line. So when you send this to the press, this is what they refer to the cut line or the trim line. And this is the full bleed that goes to edge. So that's what we refer to as a full page illustration with bleed. And of course, most children's book illustrations all are full page with bleed. And generally, they're 32 pages in length and most often in full color. And there's some great examples, of course, out in the library on the stacks. A relatively new type of illustration that's becoming more popular is the animated book. That's a whole nother realm that we're not going to talk much about, but if you like to create artwork and you're interested in motion design, you can animate your illustrations, create something very fun and engaging. As we go, if you have any questions, you can just raise your hand and I can answer them as we go. So, all right. All right, so that's a pretty broad overview of the type of illustration that can be contained in the book. So next I want to talk about who illustrators are and what jobs that they do or what their job looks like. And I first want to mention that Illustrator is not a fine artist. It's a completely different, almost completely different career path. So a fine artist is really communicating their thoughts and feelings. It's about sharing their inner world. But an illustrator is a professional that takes someone else's idea and brings it to life. So an illustrator can create visual works of communication that serve a function. So they're going to be selling a product, a service, or complementing a story, like in a book illustration. They work in the service sector, just like electricians, dentists, and mechanics. So you don't pay them taxes. It's a service. And their illustrators are usually hired based on their style, expertise, and experience. So an illustrator that has had a lot of books published is generally going to be more expensive. But if a student who's just getting started or someone who's new to the field, their rates and fees might be less. Illustrators are often represented by an agent or a publishing company, but they can also be freelancers. I think I forgot to mention that this presentation is really geared towards self-publishing authors pairing with freelance illustrators. That's my experience primarily, but I will touch on using an agency in a publisher, but that's not the primary focus of the presentation. All right, and I get this question a lot about hiring illustrators, like how much does it cost? And that really depends. Illustrators charge by the illustration or the project. Like if you're doing a children's book, they're going to give you a quote for the entire book. It's not generally by the hour. Experienced illustrators, like I mentioned, are going to charge more than students or emerging illustrators. In general, cover illustrations start from $500 and range to $3,000, depending on the illustrator's expertise. A spot illustration inside of the book can be anywhere from like $35 for like a tiny one that's really simple, up to $350. And a full children's book starts at $5,000. $15,000 is about average. There are some illustrators that will only do one children's book a year, and they'll charge enough so that they can put food on the table for their family and themselves. So they're looking at about $25,000 to $35,000, but those are kind of the exceptions and not the rule. Oh, why does it cost so much? I get asked this question a lot too. So you have to kind of keep in mind that illustrators are in it because they're paying the bills. They're using their artistic skills to provide a service that they can use then to pay their electrical bill, they feed their kids. So it is their profession, and illustration is a really time-intensive career. It takes a lot longer to create an illustration than I think most people realize. And there's also the creating of the illustration, but also all the business stuff that goes behind it, like emailing clients, keeping your bookwork, doing your taxes, that sort of thing. And when an illustrator is hired for a project, you're also paying for their education, their business expenses, and the time it took them to hone their skills. And there's always taxes. So I hate tax season. So it's usually 35% of a project goes to taxes. I hate to say it. So you kind of have to keep that in mind when you're paying your illustrator. All right, so here's some tips on how to hire an illustrator, how to find one and work with them effectively. All right, but even before you start contacting illustrators, here's a few things to keep in mind as authors, is while you're crafting your manuscript, I really encourage you to kind of fantasize and play the art director and think about what type of illustrations would accompany your story and really complement it. Think about the characters in it and how they're interacting, or maybe the landscape or some props. At this point, I just recommend keeping a tablet of paper and just pretend that you have unlimited funds and no budget, and you can hire the best professional in the world, and write a list of all of your, like a wish list, all the things that you would like to do. And that way it kind of fosters creativity, and it doesn't put limits on what's possible. Later on, you might have to pare that down because of your budget, but this is a good place to start. Also, if you're self-publishing, I really recommend taking some time to browse sites like Instagram, Behance, which is run by Adobe. We think of like Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop. They have artist profiles and portfolios that are collections from around the world. So that's a good place to start, just to look at the wide variety of illustration styles that are out there. Upwork is a website that a lot of freelancers enjoy working, or so Upwork, I should first back up a little bit, is a freelancing site. So if someone has a project that they need done, let's say it's like a brochure or a business card, a logo, or book illustrations, you can post a project on Upwork and then put a call out for illustrators. And then an illustrator will see your project, be interested in it, and then kind of write you a proposal and contact you. But also on Upwork, you can look at illustrators and their portfolios, so you can check that out. The Society of Illustrators is a really great place to find professional illustrators, or just look at the illustration styles available. And there's also online directories like the Directory of Children's Illustrations, that sort of thing. I recommend looking at lots of different illustration styles and keep your mind open to what's possible with your manuscript. And then like save a Pinterest board, or save a bunch of links on your computer so that you have a reference point when it comes to actually choosing your illustrator. So you kind of already know what you like. If you're working with a publisher, you don't have to do any of this work because they're going to choose an illustrator for you. And then that's the end of the story. And then they're going to print your work. So these are really important steps as writers that I suggest you go through before contacting an illustrator. First is you should know your book details, what service you're going to be using if you're self-publishing. That's really important. What size is your book going to be? That's really crucial for an illustrator to know, so that when they're making the illustration, it's the right proportion and it's the right pixel size ultimately. How many pages is it going to be, and whether it's going to be soft cover or hard cover. The more information you have before contacting the illustrator, the better the project is going to be, and the more streamlined it's going to be. And then you should make a budget. kind of think about how much you're willing to spend, and that's going to really determine the deliverables or the number of illustrations and the style that they can give you. And then make a list of all of the illustrations that you need. And you can have a really long list and present that to your illustrator, and based on your budget, they can tell you what's possible. So more is better, because you always can pare it down. And it's always a good idea to typeset your book first, if at all possible. That will help your illustrator to understand where the illustration is going to fall into the text. So like in this page, this was typeset first, and then this was left room for this funny little ghost rat on the side here. All right, and here's some important tips when you're getting ready to contact your illustrator is first, be confident in the illustration style that you want, and pick an illustrator that already works in that style. So even if your best friend is an artist or an illustrator and they do quaint watercolor, don't ask them to do like hyper modern digital work. An illustrator spends a lot of time crafting their style, and it's really hard just to switch gears and do something completely different. Also, please don't ask your illustrator to work for free. Offer something, even if they're an emerging illustrator or a student, and that could be all sorts of things. It could be just like you have $500 and you can see what they would be willing to do for you for $500. Some will work for free, but might want things like royalties, or one popular way of getting someone to help you work for free or little money is that you can give them books at cost, and then they're free to sell those books, and they get to pocket the profit from that. A big faux pas is please don't ask your illustrator to work for exposure. That's why we have Instagram. So there's no guarantee with that. So you're kind of like hoping your book does really well and makes a lot of money and sells lots of copies, but there's no guarantee there. And also, please don't ask for comps. A comp is when a client approaches an illustrator, graphic designer, and they're asking them to prove their skill by creating artwork for free. Really trust the portfolio of the illustrator you're working with, and go from there. Now, there are some exceptions. I once did a comp for a writer because he wanted some watercolor illustrations done for his book. I had experience in watercolor, I knew how to do it, but I didn't have anything in my portfolio at that time. So what I did is I did create a comp for him because I was fairly confident that if I did that, I was going to get the job, and I did. So there are some exceptions to that rule. All right, now begins your search. The first place to look for writers is just ask for recommendations or an illustrator. So like I've heard that maybe like you all have met various times, you're kind of a group, so ask each other if you've ever worked with an illustrator and who you'd recommend. You can also go on online forums and ask other writers if they have a recommendation for an illustrator. You can also go local, which is really fun. CU has this very active graphic design and illustration community. I'm always amazed at the talent that's in this town. The Champaign-Urbana Design Organization isn't just a group for designers. There's illustrators, there's creatives, motion designers. A lot of people are involved with that organization, and you can go to the website and just ask them to post a job. Give them a few specs, and that I've got work through there, and a lot of my colleagues have. So that's a really good group to contact, and they're super fun people, and really quite a joy to interact with. You can also contact college art departments in Illinois if you're willing to work with a student, especially one who's getting ready to graduate. So that's a really good place. And a student is usually willing to work for a lot less to build their portfolio and to gain that experience. And oftentimes students can be just as good as a professional illustrator. You can also hire a freelancer from Upwork. Oh, excuse me. Oh, you want me to go back? Oh.
Local writers groups,
Okay.
writer groups, and ask them,
Mm-hmm.
local, create a post on
Yep, and they go by CUDO, C-U-D-O, or the Champaign-Urbana Design Organization. Yep.
online job board.
Mm-hmm. And you might have to send them an email and say, hey, could you post this on their job board? And they'll do that for you. So. There's also freelancer sites like Upwork. You can post a project on there and people will bid on it, and people often bid around the world. So that's a kind of a fun way to broaden your search. And there's illustration collectives such as the Children's Illustrators directory, which is childrenillustrators.com. And then you can look at tons of portfolios. When you're looking at a collection like a collective like that, you're most often going to be working with an illustrator's agent. So you'll be contacting them instead of the illustrator directly. Yep. All right. So there's kind of some etiquette that goes along with contacting an illustrator or an agent. The first one is just send a polite message, usually by email, but you could call. Let them know that you're interested in their work and that you'd like to start a project with them. And then you're going to provide as many details as you can about the page number, any deadlines that you might need to meet, the number of illustrations in your budget, and they'll negotiate with you. So if you have a budget of like $1,500, they can give you a realistic idea of what they can provide for that amount. You may also wish to send them your manuscript. Sometimes illustrators will illustrate a book based on the agent's impression of the book, and sometimes they don't even read the manuscript. But if you're working with a freelancer, I do suggest that you send it to them and they can get an idea about the kind of the nature of your story. Yeah.
Would you be afraid, even though your story might be copyrighted, that they might try to take the story?
Especially if you're working local, I wouldn't worry about that. Yeah. You also have proof that it was your story. So if that ever happened, you'd keep an email trail, and then you have proof that this was your story that you emailed them. Yeah.
They could change it up a little bit.
I wouldn't think so, especially if you're local. But if you're concerned about that, then I would definitely go through an agent or a publisher, or if you're really concerned about it, maybe just send them excerpts, and that might be a workaround. Yeah. Once you contacted the agent or the illustrator, they'll kind of look at your project and they'll either say, no, I can't do that, or yeah, let's meet and discuss it more. And now, of course, there's Zoom. You can meet either in person or phone or Zoom. It all is good. And if they decide to decline, the number one reason why a project is declined is the illustrator's busy. They already have enough projects. That happens to me a lot. I only freelance a little bit because I'm busy teaching, so I only can take maybe a project a year. And that's not uncommon. A lot of illustrators, especially in this area, have day jobs, and so when they take your project, they're going to be working on nights and weekends, so they only can do so much. Another reason it might be declined is either the budget or the project specs are kind of vague, like the writer doesn't have a good, clear vision of what they need at that point. So don't take it to heart. There's a lot of reasons that that pairing might not work out. And then you just look for another illustrator. All right. There's a process that illustrators and designers go through that's pretty standard. It's almost like a worldwide standard at this point. And we call it the creative process or the illustration process. And it's broken down into steps. And that makes it manageable for both the illustrator and the writer. And here they are. The first, when the project is accepted, most often the agent or the illustrator is going to write what we call a brief. And that's a document that outlines the project specs based on the information provided by the writer or the author. That's going to include things like the look and the feel of the illustrations. Are they going to be vibrant or colorful? Are they going to be muted? Is it going to be digital but look like it's analog? Is it going to be hyper modern? It's also going to outline how many illustrations are going to be in the project, the size of the illustrations, and all that sort of stuff. This is a really important document. If you don't have this document before starting the project, it can go sideways really fast. So this makes sure that both parties are on the same page and you're going towards the same goal. You never want to approach an illustrator and say something like, just make me illustrations, I know what I'll like when I see it. That's always kind of a recipe for failure on both ends. So be very specific in what you need. At that point, the illustrator or the agent is going to draft the contract. That's not always the case. Some authors who have a lot of experience will contact illustrators and they want to make the contract, which is fine, but most often it's the illustrator agent. And the contract protects both of you. It's not just about the illustrator. So that outlines things like the deadline and how much the project is going to cost. And it usually includes a project deposit. So that ensures that the illustrator can buy groceries while they're working on your project, and that you're committed. And so that's also really important. And that contract, if you're working with the agent, can be pages long. My contract is usually half a page. I keep it simple because I usually work with local clients, and we have reputations to hold in town. So I'm pretty confident that I just need a small contract. You're going to pay the deposit, and that's going to start the project. Typically, 1/3 of the cost of the project is appropriate, but they might ask for only maybe 10%. It just depends on who you're working with. And then you're going to provide them art direction for each illustration. So you get to be the art director. You need to let your illustrator know what you envision for each illustration. So that includes what environment is the illustration going to be in, the emotional tone, what characters are going to be interacting, props that are used. All those things you should discuss with your illustrator, and they'll write all that stuff down. But leave the composition and the layout to the illustrator. That's what they're best at and what they're trained at. So you want to make sure that you're utilizing their expertise that way. All right. Right. So next comes the concepts, and these are rough sketches based on the art direction that you gave them. The concepts actually take the longest to do. So if it takes like a couple weeks before you get the concepts, that's really normal. For me personally, this is the hardest thing to do, is to take what the author is visioning and put it in a composition that works. But depending on your contract, you might expect 1 to 4 concepts. If you're on a tight budget, maybe your contract only allows for 1 or 2 concepts, or if you have a bigger budget, maybe they're going to give you 4. What you're going to do is look at those carefully and then decide which concept works best for your story. You can also request combining concepts. So let's say you have 2 characters that are having a conversation out on a city street, and one concept, one of them is wearing a dress, and the other concept they're wearing, I don't know, like jeans and a t-shirt. You can ask them like to change clothing. You can say, concept A, I want the clothing from concept A, but I like how they're standing in concept B. So you can kind of combine them that way. Concepts are usually done in pencil or digitally on a tablet. Digitally on a tablet is now the most common. Based on your feedback, the illustrator is then going to create a proof or a work in progress. And it's like an illustration that's like half done. And they're going to send that to the writer and ask for feedback to make sure they're going in the right direction before putting a lot more work into it. At that point, you can ask for revisions. You can say, oh, maybe instead of the shirt being blue, it now needs to be green. And if they're working digitally, that's pretty easy to do. You don't want to request major revisions that deviate drastically from the concepts. That's really going to set your project back. And finally, they're based on the feedback from the proof, they're going to create a final illustration that they think best represents your vision. At that point, it's not unreasonable to ask for additional revisions that are fairly minor, especially if the illustrator is working digitally and those revisions, are easy to make. Then you get the revision, and that's what goes to print. So if it's an analog piece done in traditional media, the illustrator will scan it and get a digital copy. If it's already digital, they might do some final editing and get it ready for print for you. Okay. So there's a post-illustration process. So after the illustrator has made all of your illustrations, this is what to expect after that process. The illustrator shares the deliverables, and that's just a fancy word for pieces of graphic design or illustration that you paid them to do. They should be giving them to you as high-resolution digital files, usually through a Dropbox. They'll set up a Dropbox, they'll give you a link, and then you download it if you're self-publishing. It's no longer common for illustrators to work exclusively in traditional media, so you should expect most often there's to be a digital component. I kind of want to talk about this for a little bit. I was working with a writer. He's a great guy. He's actually one of my best clients. And he really wanted traditional watercolor illustrations, like from start to finish. And I have a lot of experience working in traditional media, and I'm like, okay, we can do that. But this is, I kind of, prepared them for what this would entail. And sure enough, we got to the end of an illustration. He really liked it, but he had changed his mind. He had changed his mind that he wants one of the figures to be slightly off to the right. And if it's completely analog, pigment on paper, you can't do that. You have to start completely over. And once he realized that there is less flexibility and he has less ability to request edits at the very end, we compromised, and I did all of the color in watercolor, but then scanned it and did the final artwork digitally. And that was the perfect marriage, illustration style. Mm-hmm.
So when you scan the watercolors, can you get a high resolution?
Oh, absolutely. So when I scan a watercolor, I have, it's actually not even that expensive. I think it's under $100 scanner for my Mac, and I work fairly large. So when you make illustrations, generally they're 1.5 the size it's going to be when it's printed, so that I scan it really big, and then when it goes to print, it compresses, and that ensures that you have high pixel density. So absolutely. Yep.
You couldn't just like use a digital phone to take a picture of it.
Nope.
That won't give you good resolution.
Nope. You have to have a scanner. Yep. And their services, like Dixon Graphics, will scan artwork for you for a charge. And I've actually done that with larger pieces that I didn't want to have to piece them together in Photoshop. And I think it was like $15 a scan.
You said Dixon.
Dixon Graphics. Yep, just over here.
So like most of the children's books in which you read have been scanned.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's not already digital.
Yep. Yep. And that's how the printer needs digital copies in order to print it now. So it's very, very rare that a publisher or printer will accept original artwork. There are some exceptions, like master illustrators who are to the point in their career that they don't want to work digitally, but are so well known and so expensive that they're willing to do all that scanning and stuff for them. But that's the exception, not the rule. And then if you would share your illustrations with your graphic designer if you're using one. So if you're using a graphic designer to help you lay out your book, they're the ones that will place the illustrations within the text, usually using Adobe InDesign. That's the most common software for that. If you're self-publishing, I haven't used a lot of the self-publishing services myself, but I think there's options that you can like place illustrations in the text, but you're going to have less flexibility than if you had a graphic designer actually lay out the book for you. And then you pay your illustrator. It's usually polite to pay them within 30 days, but 45 days is not unreasonable. And they'll send you an invoice, usually by email. Oh, I forgot to mention that some illustrators are also really good graphic designers. So oftentimes when I work with an author, I actually lay out the book for them and do the illustrations and do the whole package, and then I send it off to a printer for them. So that's not uncommon. So if the whole process seems really intimidating, that might be a route that you want to go, is just hire someone that can do all that for you. So here's some suggestions and tips on working with your illustrator. And this makes it fun for everyone. When an illustrator and a writer really come together and really mesh well, the project is super fun. And I think that's one reason I keep coming back to it, is that relationship I have with my clients. And a professional relationship often becomes like a real friendship, which is quite lovely. The first thing is to make time in your schedule to actively participate in the illustration process. I think writers are actually quite surprised how engaged they are in the process and how much time it really takes. So make sure you schedule that into your day. And please don't ask your illustrator to do more than what's specified in the contract unless you're willing to pay them for additional work. Sometimes they'll do extra stuff for you and they'll just charge you by the hour, which is not uncommon. And that can include things like asking them to help you upload your manuscript to like a self-publishing service. They could probably do that for you, but you'd want to give them a little extra for their time and effort. Also, do your best to provide feedback in a timely manner so that they can meet the deadlines that you have given them. And your illustrator should also do their best to meet those deadlines. But understand life happens, COVID, for example. So be willing to work with your illustrator if they have some unexpected hardships. An example of this was I was working on a series of 60 illustrations for a local writer last spring. Big project, took about 9 months from start to finish. And my mother broke her neck, and she's in Minnesota. And then 2 weeks later, my stepfather had a heart attack. So I was in Minnesota for 3 weeks, on and off, and I contacted the writer and was like, hey, this is my life situation. I'm going to take my work with me and work remotely, but I'm going to be caring for my elderly parents. And he was super good with it because we already had this great relationship established, and we only ended up being like a week behind schedule. So it all worked out in the end. Oh, both my folks are fine, by the way. Everyone's good. But sometimes it doesn't work out. It's pretty rare, but occasionally a project needs to be canceled. There can be different reasons for that. A huge life change in one of the parties. Maybe the work that they're giving you isn't what you wanted or what they promised. Maybe you just not like, your working relationship isn't what you expected. Most contracts have what they, it's kind of an awful term for it, called a kill fee. And that's a fee that will allow you to terminate the project. And everyone walks away. And the sooner you do this, the better. And that fee will just pay the illustrator for whatever they've done up to that point for you. But it doesn't hold you responsible or obligated to pay for any future work that would have been in that contract. Usually you don't get your deposit back. And that fee is usually fairly small, so know that that's an option most of the time. And like I mentioned, if it's not working out, cancel the project early than later, and don't worry about hurting your illustrator's feelings. It's going to be your book. You want it to be nice, and you want it to be what you envisioned, and you don't want to get to the point where you publish it and you're not completely satisfied with it. So be willing to have that hard conversation if you really need it. But like I said, I've only known one instance with a colleague that they actually had to do this. So it's pretty rare. All right. So that wraps up the section on working with in Illustrator. Do you have any questions before we move on to actually Making your own illustrations? Okay. So, creating your own illustrations. If you don't have any professional illustration experience, and just remember that being a fine artist is about self-expression, it's not the same as being an illustrator. So I recommend starting with some online courses. I'm going to give you a list of resources here in a moment. And I love online courses. I still use them as a professional. I spend, at least a few hours every week just kind of learning new knowledge and skills. So if you have some artistic skill but never illustrated, try out one of those online courses. And know your pixels. So this is super important, and this is why I recommend, if you're not tech savvy, to actually hire someone to either help you with this process or do it for you. The publishing industry is very specific about the resolution that your images need to be. They call that PPI, or pixels per inch. I should have wrote it down in here, but it's usually 300 to 400 PPI is standard. 300 is what you get off a high-end copy machine. Or like if you send something to Premier Print Group or Dixon, they're going to be printing most things in 300 PPI. Higher than that, up to 600, are reserved for art prints, which most of the time isn't going to be in a book. You also need to know the image file types that they want. Some want PDFs, some want PNGs, and you need to make sure that you deliver to your printer that right file format. The great thing is printers really want your business, like a lot, and they will bend over backwards to help you through this process. So if you're starting a project and you want to use them as your printer, give them a call. Say, hey, I'm going to do this book. Do you have some recommendations for me on how to work with the file types? And I recommend do that before you start illustrating, even if you're working digitally, because you'll set up your artboard for a certain PPI at a certain dimension, and you need to make sure that dimension is correct before starting. You don't want to make a tiny illustration digitally and then find out that you don't have enough pixels once it's blown up. So make sure you get that taken care of before you start creating artwork, because it's not fun to have to go back and redo something. You can also ask a designer to help you. You can pay them per hour. That's often, I've done that on several occasions, where I just act as a consultant. And I sometimes have scanned things for people. I'll kind of help them connect with a printer. And other graphic designers in the area have done that too. So don't be afraid to contact Kudo and ask if they have someone that can help you. All right, and here's some sources. Will you be sending out an email with reference? Okay, great. So I'll try to make sure that these get passed on. But these are some of my favorite resources, and I'll kind of show you some of their websites here in a moment. Behance is run by Adobe, and that's the service I mentioned earlier that illustrators can put their portfolios on there, and you can browse them and contact them usually directly. I love Behance. You can just spend hours looking through artwork. The Society of Illustrators is a collection of professional illustrators. Their work is top-notch. So if they come out with an annual every year that you can, I think, pick up at the local bookstore. There might be one here at the library, I'm not sure. But it's a joy to look through that. There's also a Society of Science Fiction and Fantasy Illustrators, which I forgot to add the link to that. You can go to Barnes & Noble and get their annual. I do every year. It's called Spectrum. And if you're a sci-fi fantasy fan, you'll want to collect them for the rest of your life. They're great. Yeah, they're about $60 to $65. Yeah. Let's see. And then Upwork is the freelance site I mentioned before. If you're writing children's books, even if you don't want to work with an agent, it's a nice place to look to see who's working in what style and what style might appeal to you. Lots of portfolios there. And there's always Instagram. Instagram is now the primary platform for illustrators connecting with an audience. I have a former student that works in graphic design and also illustration. She's still here in town. But she is so good at Instagram. Her stuff is on there all the time. And actually, Playboy hired her to design a clothing line. And then that's now part of her portfolio. Yeah, just from Instagram. It's pretty crazy.
What did you say was the name of the science fiction?
Oh, Spectrum. Spectrum magazine. I'll bring it up here in a second. There are so many resources now out there that were not available 10 years ago. And LinkedIn Learning has great tutorials. A lot of them are fairly new about designing illustrations for books, any from children's books to adult novels. And that's free with your library account, with the Champaign library card. Domestica is actually my favorite, and I'll show you what their website looks like. That's an international site. A lot of their videos are not in English, but subtitled. It's actually my favorite service as of now because they're all professionals. They're working in the industry. And when you, instead of subscribing and having to pay $30 a month, like Skillshare, once you buy the course, you can go and watch it anytime. So let's say you watch the course and 3 months later, like, oh, I forgot that little thing that they showed. You can go back and do that. You can't do that with a service like Skillshare, which has gotten more expensive. You can only watch videos if you're paying monthly. Creative Bug also has videos, and that's free with your library account. I've become a big fan of Creative Bug lately. And then Schoolism is actually run by Bobby Cho, and he was the illustrator behind the most recent Alice in Wonderland animated film. And he lives in Canada, and he got all these professional illustrators together to offer classes on his site. It's mostly fantasy and sci-fi themed, but there are also other genres available on there. All right. Do you have any questions? This ends the presentation before I kind of give you a tour of some other websites. Okay. All right. So this is Behance. So creatives doing all sorts of things have their portfolio on there. Anything from photography to motion design, illustration, graphic design, even some product design.
So you pay to get access to this?
Nope, this is free. Yep, this is definitely free. And then this is the Society of Illustrators. So they have a really nice annual, and you can look at the artists that are part of this organization, and they also have some fun and interesting articles that you can read. All right, this is Upwork. It's only one of many freelance marketplaces out there. There are others, so I suggest that if this is a route you're interested in, take a look. The Directory of Children's Illustrators. This is a worldwide collection. These illustrators are often represented by an agent. Okay, and LinkedIn, which is free with your library card. I really like LinkedIn. I force my students to take LinkedIn courses. So they say they learn a lot, but I think it gets, yeah. They have one that, what's his name? Now it's blank. He is a illustrator and graphic designer, and I'll remember it by the end of the lecture. I'm zoning on his name. But if you logged in and just do children's book illustration or just book illustration, you get quite the archive. I'll remember his name in a moment. This is Domestica, and huge archive of online courses that you can purchase. And they usually have sales like this every month where you can get it like 75% off. I bought about 6 or 7 of them and have never been disappointed. But you have to be really good at reading subtitles if it's not in your native language. but I think it's well worth it. Skillshare, it's a monthly subscription where pretty much anyone can post a video. It is not as well curated as this service, but I have learned a lot from Skillshare. Creative Bug is free with your Champaign library card, and anything from knitting to crocheting to illustrating, watercolor, there's all sorts of stuff on here. I've really enjoyed it. This is the service from Bobby, and click on courses. It's schoolism.com. And these are a lot more expensive, but they are thorough and very good. I've done a few of these and have not been disappointed. I found it well worth the investment. And I think that that's part of it, like, and that's what I tell my students too, is free is great, and you should take advantage of all the free resources you can, but I've never been disappointed in investing in myself, in my my skill set. And most of the people that I've talked to who have also invested in their skill set by taking a paid course or in person or online have not regretted it. So I encourage you to do that if you can come up with the funds. Animated books are kind of a thing. And oftentimes it's just taking static images, hiring a motion designer, and putting motion to it. And so that's another genre to keep in mind. Let's see, Spectrum magazine. Oops, Spectrum. Oops. We actually have several at least 2 local illustrators who've made it into Spectrum and have won awards. It's pretty crazy the talent that's in this town. So this is the look and the feel of Spectrum. So kind of in the fantasy sci-fi genre. Well, thanks so much. I think I've hit, actually I timed that pretty good. Any last questions, comments, thoughts? Yeah.
Where can you go if you want to just to see the actual illustrations versus, just looking at books? If you're curious about what traditional work looks like
Before it's scanned?
Huh?
That's a really good question. If it's like a freelancer, you could request that you look at the pieces in person, a physical portfolio. There's the Rare Book Library at the U of I that is open to the public. I think it used to be by appointment, but they might have opened their doors a little wider now. You can contact one of their curators and ask them, do you have any original illustrations to look at? And they might be able to either help you out or put you in contact with someone who can.
Well, I'm always curious, and it's really hard to find. I know one time I was in Philadelphia and I came across some, in a museum, Charles Dickens, the illustrator.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know there's a museum on the East Coast that has, it's an children's book illustrator museum.
Oh, neat.
But, just seeing it around here, it's just the original works. It's very difficult to come across it.
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The contemporary reason is that most things are digital now, and so they don't have like a hard copy. Another is that the illustrator always retains copyrights of their work. They kind of basically like lease it to you. You get to use it for your project, of course, and they won't like use it for another project. They're your illustrations, but they retain the copyright, so they can use it in their portfolio. They can put it on Instagram. That's generally how that's done. So, yeah. Any other questions? Good. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming out tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for coming out. I want to give a big thank you to Liza for leading such an informative and fun workshop. Our next workshop will be on June 1st, and that will be the workshop Revamping the Classics with local author Jeanette Watts. And that will actually be on the second floor of the library in room 215, so hopefully you can join us for that. Thank you everyone for coming.
What time's that?
7 p.m.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.